When respected astrophysicist Dr. Marcus Washington approaches airport security, it's just another day of scientific travel. But everything changes when a racist TSA agent singles him out, questioning his credentials and refusing to believe he's really a NASA scientist. What the agent doesn't expect, the NASA director calling during the search. Watch as one scientist uses data, evidence, and unwavering dignity to transform not just a single encounter, but an entire broken system. From humiliating detention to congressional testimony, follow the methodical journey that created the scientific materials transport protocol and changed air travel for researchers everywhere. Does systematic change require a scientist's approach? Watch the full story, then share your thoughts in the comments. Has something similar ever happened to you or someone you know? Your experiences matter in this ongoing conversation. Dr. Marcus Washington adjusted his glasses as he checked the departure board. His flight to Geneva was scheduled to leave in 2 hours, plenty of time to clear security and review his presentation one more time. At 58, Marcus had spent nearly 3 decades at the forefront of astrophysics research, specializing in exoplanet atmospheres and their potential for harboring life. The International Space Science Conference had invited him as their keynote speaker, a prestigious honor even for someone with his credentials. After checking his carry-on bag containing his laptop and research materials, Marcus approached the security checkpoint at Terminal B next, called TSA Agent Richard Delton, a heavy-set man in his mid-40s with a perpetual scowl carved into his face. As Marcus placed his items on the conveyor belt, laptop in a separate bin, shoes removed, pockets emptied, he maintained the practiced efficiency of a frequent traveler. ID and boarding pass, Delton demanded, barely looking up. Marcus handed over his passport and the digital boarding pass on his phone. Delton's eyes narrowed slightly as he examined the documents, then looked back at Marcus with unmistakable suspicion. Purpose of travel? Delton asked, a question Marcus knew wasn't standard procedure for domestic travelers, let alone someone with TSA pre-check status. Scientific conference in Geneva. I'm presenting research, Marcus replied evenly, maintaining eye contact. Delton's expression shifted subtly. You're a scientist? The skepticism in his voice was unmistakable. Yes, I'm an astrophysicist with the National Space Research Institute, Marcus answered, keeping his tone professional despite the growing discomfort. He'd experienced this kind of questioning before, the surprise, the disbelief, the subtle implication that he couldn't possibly be who he claimed to be. Delton grunted, holding the passport longer than necessary. Step over here, please, we need to conduct a random screening. Marcus glanced at his watch, still plenty of time before his flight, and complied without protest. He knew the drill: make no sudden movements, keep hands visible, maintain a neutral expression. Around him, other travelers, mostly white businessmen and families, proceeded through the security line without additional scrutiny. Arms out, Delton instructed as he began what would become an unusually thorough pat-down. What kind of scientist did you say you were again? Astrophysicist, Marcus repeated, his voice steady despite his rising frustration. I study planetary atmospheres. Right, Delton said with a smirk. And that bag, he pointed to Marcus's carry-on now coming through the scanner, what's in there? My laptop, research materials, and a change of clothes, Marcus answered. Delton motioned to another agent. We're going to need to inspect that bag, follow me. Marcus followed them to a small screening area, separated from the main concourse by a partial wall. He noticed several travelers watching the scene unfold, some with discomfort, others with indifference. This wasn't the first time he'd been singled out, but that never made it easier. Sir, I'd like to point out that I have TSA pre-check status and a flight to catch, Marcus said calmly as Delton began methodically removing items from his bag. This won't take long if you cooperate, Delton replied without looking up. What's this? He held up a small, specialized data storage device. That's a secure drive containing research data, Marcus explained. It's encrypted and contains information about exoplanet atmospheric compositions we've been studying. Delton's eyebrows raised. Encrypted data, you'll need to unlock this. I can't do that here. It contains proprietary research data protected by federal research guidelines, Marcus stated firmly. Well then, we have a problem, Delton said, his voice taking on an edge of authority. I can't clear you with encrypted devices that you refuse to unlock. Marcus took a deep breath. I'd like to speak with your supervisor, please. My supervisor will tell you the same thing, Delton said, a slight smile playing at the corner of his mouth. No unlocked device, no clearance, simple as that. Just then, Marcus's phone rang. The caller ID displayed NASA Director Collins. The ringing phone drew everyone's attention. Marcus maintained his composure as he reached for it, his eyes never leaving Delton's face. Excuse me, I need to take this call, Marcus said evenly. It's from my director. Delton's expression wavered between annoyance and uncertainty. Make it quick, he muttered, still holding Marcus's research drive. Dr. Washington speaking, Marcus answered, his voice carrying the authority of his position. Marcus. Sarah Collins here, came the clear voice through the speaker, audible enough for those nearby to hear. I'm checking in before your Geneva presentation. The administrator and I were reviewing your slides this morning. Brilliant work on those atmospheric anomalies. The European Space Agency representatives are particularly eager to discuss collaboration possibilities. Delton's eyes widened slightly as he processed the conversation. Marcus noticed the subtle shift in the agent's demeanor but maintained his professional tone. Thank you, Director Collins. I'm currently at airport security. There seems to be some concern about the encrypted research drive I'm carrying. A brief pause followed before Director Collins responded, her voice taking on a more official tone. Put the security agent on the phone, please. Marcus extended his phone toward Delton. Director Collins would like to speak with you. Delton hesitated, glancing around at his colleagues who had stopped their work to watch the unfolding scene. Reluctantly, he took the phone. This is TSA Agent Delton, he said, attempting to maintain his authoritative stance. Even from a short distance, Marcus could hear the clear, commanding voice of Sarah Collins. Agent Delton, I'm Dr. Sarah Collins, Director of Planetary Science at NASA. Dr. Washington is carrying classified research data for an international presentation representing the United States government. That drive contains sensitive information protected under federal research security protocols and international scientific cooperation agreements. Dr. Washington has all necessary clearances for transport of this material. Delton's face reddened as he listened. Several passengers had stopped to observe the interaction, and a young woman nearby was discreetly recording with her phone. Yes, but standard protocol requires, Delton began, but Director Collins cut him off. I understand your protocols, Agent Delton. I'm familiar with TSA procedures for scientific research transport. Dr. Washington's materials and travel have been pre-cleared through the appropriate channels. His security status should be visible in your system under Federal Research Exemption Code, FR 237. Please verify this immediately. Delton looked toward his computer terminal, then motioned for a colleague to check something on the system. The second agent typed rapidly, then looked up with surprise. It's there, the colleague confirmed quietly. FR 237 exemption highest clearance. Delton swallowed hard, handing the phone back to Marcus. One moment, sir, he said, the sir noticeably added for the first time. Marcus resumed his conversation with Director Collins. Thank you, Sarah. I believe they're verifying my clearance now. Good. Let me know if there are any further issues. This research is too important to be delayed by administrative oversight. The administrator sends his regards and looks forward to your report when you return. As Marcus ended the call, he noticed Delton had already begun carefully repacking his bag, the confrontational attitude replaced with nervous efficiency. Everything appears to be in order, Dr. Washington, Delton said stiffly. Sorry for the inconvenience. Thank you, Marcus replied simply, maintaining his dignity despite the humiliation he'd just experienced. As he collected his belongings, a middle-aged woman approached from the line of waiting passengers. Excuse me, she said quietly. I'm Janet Winters, an attorney. I witnessed this entire interaction. Would you mind if I gave you my card? What happened here wasn't right. Marcus accepted her business card, noting her firm specialized in civil rights cases. Thank you, Ms. Winters. As Marcus walked away from security toward his gate, he heard Delton being called aside by a supervisor. His phone buzzed with a text message from Director Collins. Call me when you land. This isn't the first incident we've heard about at that checkpoint. Time to address it formally. Marcus took a deep breath. He had a choice to make: focus solely on his important presentation or take a stand against a pattern of discrimination that affected not just him but countless others. The weight of that decision accompanied him as he made his way to his departure gate. After boarding his flight, Marcus settled into his first-class seat, courtesy of NASA's travel accommodations for key scientific personnel. As the plane reached cruising altitude, his mind wasn't on the atmospheric pressure outside the aircraft but on the pressure he'd felt at security. He opened his laptop and began documenting the incident in precise detail: times, names, statements, and witnesses, his scientific training serving him well in this entirely different context. The Geneva conference would have to share his mental space with this incident. Marcus knew from experience and countless conversations with colleagues that what happened to him wasn't isolated. It was systematic, predictable, and most importantly documentable. His phone chimed with an incoming email from Janet Winters, the attorney who had witnessed the incident. Dr. Washington, I've taken the liberty of documenting what I observed today and have statements from 2 other witnesses who were disturbed by Agent Delton's conduct. This appears to be part of a pattern at this particular checkpoint. If you're interested in pursuing this matter, please contact me at your convenience. Regards. Janet Winters-esque, Civil Rights Division, Winters and Associates. Marcus forwarded the email to Director Collins with a brief note explaining his encounter with the attorney. Within minutes, his phone rang. Marcus, I've spoken with our legal team, Director Collins said without preamble. This isn't just about you. We've received reports from 3 other scientists of color experiencing similar treatment at various airports in the past year alone. The administrator believes it's time to address this systematically. What are you suggesting? Marcus asked, his voice low to maintain privacy in the cabin. We're prepared to file a formal complaint with DHS and support any additional actions you might wish to take. This attorney who contacted you, she might be a valuable resource. Marcus considered the implications. A public complaint could generate media attention. Would that create problems for the agency? The agency stands behind its scientists, Collins replied firmly. Besides, NASA has been pushing for better treatment of scientific personnel transporting research materials for years. This could actually help that cause. After ending the call, Marcus opened his presentation slides. His talk on atmospheric signatures of potentially habitable worlds seemed distant now, though no less important. As he refined his points about methane anomalies on distant planets, he couldn't help but reflect on the anomalies of human behavior much closer to home. When his flight landed in Geneva 7 hours later, Marcus was greeted by a representative from the European Space Agency. Dr. Washington, welcome. Your presentation is generating quite a buzz among the attendees. Thank you, Marcus replied, following her to the waiting car. Also, there's something else you should know, she added, showing him her tablet. A video was posted online a few hours ago. It shows your interaction with that security agent. It's already gained significant traction. The video showed the entire encounter from the perspective of the woman who had been recording. The clear audio captured Delton's dismissive tone, the NASA director's authoritative intervention, and the visible shift in the agent's demeanor when he realized his error. Most damning were the background images showing other travelers, predominantly white, passing through with minimal scrutiny while Marcus was detained. The video had already accumulated over 200,000 views and thousands of comments, many from travelers sharing similar experiences. I didn't know this was being recorded, Marcus said quietly. It's gone viral in scientific circles, the ESA representative explained. Several major news outlets have picked it up as well. They're calling it another example of flying while black. As they drove into Geneva, Marcus's phone buzzed constantly with notifications. Colleagues expressing outrage, NASA's Public Affairs Office requesting guidance on an official statement, and a message from Janet Winters. Dr. Washington. The video has created an opportunity. I've been contacted by 11 other travelers who experienced similar treatment from Agent Delton. With your permission, I'd like to discuss the possibility of a class action complaint. This could be a watershed moment for accountability. Janet Winters. Marcus stared at the message, the weight of decision pressing on him. He had come to Geneva to discuss distant worlds, not to become the center of a civil rights controversy. Yet the scientist in him recognized that patterns required investigation, and injustice, like any natural phenomenon, needed to be understood and addressed with methodical precision. He typed his response. I'll call you after my presentation tomorrow. This deserves my full attention. As Marcus prepared for his keynote presentation at the Geneva International Conference Center, his methodical mind couldn't help but approach the airport incident with the same analytical rigor he applied to his research. He opened his laptop and created a new document titled Incident Analysis Framework, organizing the available data. 1. Primary documentation. Personal account timestamped. Video evidence 3:42 duration. Witness statements 3 confirmed. TSA system verification, FR 237 clearance. 2. Pattern identification. 11 similar incidents with same agent. Agency reports of 3 comparable cases. Statistical analysis pending. 3. Response variables. Legal class action potential. Institutional NASA involvement. Public awareness viral video impact. Procedural reform security protocols. The conference hall was filling quickly when Marcus's phone vibrated. It was a message from Director Collins, White House Science Advisor, requesting briefing on both your research and the incident. Administration concerned about treatment of federal scientists. Marcus took a deep breath and centered himself. For the next hour, he needed to focus entirely on his presentation. The atmospheric anomalies he had discovered on exoplanet Kepler 452b represented a potential breakthrough in the search for extraterrestrial life. This scientific work remained his primary mission. Dr. Washington. "We're ready for you," the conference moderator said, gesturing toward the stage. Marcus nodded, closed his incident analysis document, and opened his presentation. As he walked to the podium, he could hear the murmurs in the audience, not just about his scientific credentials, but about the video that many had now seen. "Good morning," Marcus began, his voice steady and clear. "Today I'll be presenting our findings on atmospheric methane variations that may indicate biological processes on potentially habitable exoplanets." For the next 45 minutes, Marcus commanded the room with his expertise, methodically explaining complex data patterns that could revolutionize our understanding of life beyond Earth. The questions afterward were incisive and thoughtful, focusing entirely on the science, a reminder of why he had dedicated his life to this field. As the session concluded, the conference chair approached him. "Dr. Washington, your presentation was extraordinary, but I must ask, that incident at the airport, is there anything the international scientific community can do to support you?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "Actually, yes. This isn't just about one incident or one person. It's about ensuring that scientists from all backgrounds can conduct their work without unnecessary barriers. Perhaps the conference could issue a statement about the importance of dignified treatment for researchers traveling with sensitive materials." The chair nodded thoughtfully. "I'll raise it with the executive committee immediately." Back in his hotel room that evening, Marcus found an email from Janet Winters with a detailed outline of potential legal approaches, and more significantly, a comprehensive data analysis of TSA screening patterns at the airport where his incident occurred. The analysis, compiled by a data scientist who had seen the viral video, showed statistically significant disparities in secondary screening rates based on race, even when controlling for other variables like pre-check status and travel frequency. Marcus studied the data carefully, recognizing the scientific rigor behind it. This wasn't just anecdotal evidence, it was empirical proof of systematic bias. His phone rang. Director Collins again. "Marcus, how was the presentation?" "It went well. The methane variation patterns generated significant interest." "Excellent. Now about the other matter, our legal team has been in contact with Ms. Winters. They believe this case could establish an important precedent for how federal scientists are treated during travel. The administrator wants to know if you're willing to be the primary complainant." Marcus looked at the data analysis on his screen, the patterns as clear as any he'd observed in planetary atmospheres. "Yes," he said decisively, "but I want to approach this scientifically. We need comprehensive data collection, statistical analysis, and peer review of our methodology. If we're going to address this issue, let's do it with the same rigor we apply to our research." "That's exactly what we hoped you'd say," Collins replied. "The science advisor believes this approach could establish a new standard for addressing these issues. She's suggesting a multi-agency task force." As he ended the call, Marcus received a notification that the video of his airport encounter had surpassed 1 million views. The comments section had become a forum for scientists of color sharing similar experiences, a spontaneous data collection exercise that further validated the pattern. Marcus began typing a new email to Janet Winters, outlining his vision for a scientifically rigorous approach to the case. The astrophysicist who studied patterns across the cosmos was now applying those same analytical skills to patterns of human behavior much closer to home. Marcus's scientific approach to the airport incident quickly transformed what might have been an isolated complaint into a methodical investigation. 3 weeks after returning from Geneva, he found himself in a virtual meeting with an unexpected coalition of stakeholders. Present in the video conference were Janet Winters and 2 attorneys from her civil rights firm, NASA Chief Legal Officer and Director Collins, a representative from the DHS Office of Civil Rights and Civil Liberties, Dr. Elaine Chen, a data scientist specializing in pattern recognition, 2 senior TSA officials looking visibly uncomfortable. "Thank you all for joining," Marcus began, sharing his screen to display a carefully organized presentation. "I've structured today's discussion to address 3 key components: data collection methodology, preliminary statistical findings, and proposed reform metrics." The first slide showed a matrix of incidents, categorized by severity, location, and demographic patterns, the result of Dr. Chen's analysis of over 200 reported cases that had emerged since the video went viral. "What we're seeing," Marcus explained, "is not random variation but a consistent pattern with statistical significance at P0, 001. Secondary screening rates for non-white scientists transporting research materials exceed expected frequencies by 340% when controlling for all relevant variables. One of the TSA officials leaned forward. Dr. Washington, while we take these allegations seriously, these could be coincidental outliers rather than systematic issues. Marcus nodded, anticipating this response, which is precisely why we've implemented a comprehensive data collection protocol. He advanced to the next slide, which displayed a QR code. This reporting system, developed in partnership with Dr. Chen, allows travelers to document incidents in real time with standardized parameters. We've already collected 342 verified reports, Dr. Chen added. The geographic distribution shows concentration at specific checkpoints, including the one where Dr. Washington was detained. The TSA officials exchanged concerned glances. Janet Winters spoke up. Beyond the statistical evidence, we have documented a pattern of procedural violations. Agent Delton failed to follow established protocols for scientific materials with federal exemptions in 83% of reported cases. The DHS representative, who had been quietly taking notes, finally spoke. Dr. Washington, this approach is unusual. Most complaints we receive focus on individual incidents rather than systematic analysis. I'm a scientist, Marcus replied simply. This is how I approach problems, with data, analysis, and peer review. Director Collins smiled slightly. And this is precisely why the White House Science Advisor is now involved. The administration sees this as an opportunity to address both security needs and equal treatment obligations through evidence-based policy. The meeting continued for 2 hours, with Marcus methodically addressing questions and presenting evidence. As they concluded, the DHS representative made an unexpected announcement. Based on the preliminary findings presented today, we're initiating a formal review of screening procedures at all major research hubs. Dr. Washington, we would like you to serve as a technical advisor to this review panel. Marcus hadn't anticipated this development. I'd be willing, provided the process remains transparent and data-driven. After the virtual meeting ended, Marcus received a call from Director Collins. That went even better than we expected, she said. But there's something else you should know. Agent Delton has been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation, and he's not happy about it. Has he made threats? Marcus asked, concerned. Not explicitly, but he's hired counsel and is claiming he's being scapegoated. He's also attempting to access your travel records to find inconsistencies. Marcus considered this information carefully. We need to prepare for significant resistance. Systems don't change easily. Agreed. Which is why I've assigned security for your upcoming lectures. Speaking of which, CNN is requesting an interview about both your research and this case. They're interested in how you're applying scientific methodology to civil rights issues. After ending the call, Marcus opened his email to find a message from a name he didn't recognize. Thomas Delton, Agent Delton's son. Dr. Washington. My father is not the monster he's being portrayed as. He's been with TSA for 15 years with an exemplary record. This one incident is destroying his career and our family. There are things you don't know about the pressures agents are under. I'm asking you, person, to reconsider this crusade. Thomas Delton. Marcus stared at the screen, feeling the weight of human consequences beyond the data and statistics. He had initiated something that was now affecting lives in ways he hadn't fully anticipated. For all his scientific detachment, this reminder of the human element gave him pause. He began typing a response, choosing his words carefully. Mr. Delton, I appreciate your reaching out. This investigation isn't about any single agent, but about addressing patterns that affect many people. I would be willing to speak with you to hear your perspective. 4 months after the airport incident, what had begun as a personal confrontation had evolved into a comprehensive federal review. Marcus sat in a wood-paneled conference room at DHS headquarters in Washington, D.C., reviewing the data displayed on the large screen. The pattern recognition algorithm has identified 17 security checkpoints with statistically significant deviation from expected screening distributions, Dr. Chen explained, highlighting clusters on the national map. When we cross-reference these locations with complaint data, we find an 87% correlation. The review panel, consisting of TSA officials, civil rights attorneys, scientific organization representatives, and data analysts, had been meeting bi-weekly for 3 months. Today's session focused on the preliminary findings report scheduled for publication next week. What's particularly telling, Marcus added, is the correlation between aberrant screening patterns and specific shift supervisors. He gestured toward a timeline display showing incident frequencies. The data indicates this isn't just about individual agents, but about leadership and culture at specific locations. The TSA deputy administrator, initially skeptical of the investigation, now appeared genuinely concerned. These findings are troubling. The inconsistencies undermine our core mission of effective, uniform security protocols. Janet Winters, who had expanded her legal team to handle the growing class action case, added context. We've documented 412 verifiable incidents affecting scientists from minority backgrounds. The economic impact includes missed conferences, delayed research, and compromised materials. Marcus checked his watch. In 30 minutes, he was scheduled to testify before the House Science Committee about both the investigation and the broader issue of scientific mobility. His dual identity as researcher and complainant had transformed him into an unexpected advocate for systemic reform. His phone vibrated with a message from Director Collins. WH Science Advisor confirmed new screening protocols for scientific materials receiving executive priority. As the meeting concluded, a DHS civil rights officer approached Marcus privately. Dr. Washington, there's something you should know. Agent Delton has been attempting to build a counter-narrative. He's claiming he was following unofficial directives from higher-ups. Is there evidence of this? Marcus asked. We've found concerning email threads suggesting certain profiles were targeted for enhanced scrutiny without official documentation. This could expand the scope of our investigation significantly. The implications were substantial. What had begun as an examination of individual bias might now reveal institutional policies that tacitly encourage discriminatory practices while maintaining plausible deniability. Later that afternoon, Marcus testified before the congressional committee. The hearing room was packed with journalists, scientists, and civil rights advocates. Dr. Washington, began the committee chair, you've applied scientific methodology to what many might consider a purely social or legal issue. Could you explain your approach? Marcus leaned toward the microphone. Representative science is fundamentally about observing patterns, establishing baselines, testing hypotheses, and replicating results. When we observe a pattern of disparate treatment, we can apply these same principles to determine whether it represents random variation or systematic bias. And your conclusions? The chair prompted. The data demonstrates unequivocally that scientists from minority backgrounds face disproportionate obstacles when transporting research materials through certain security checkpoints, even when following all established protocols and possessing appropriate clearances. A skeptical representative interrupted. Dr. Washington, couldn't this simply reflect the reality that security requires profiling based on risk assessment? Marcus was prepared for this question. Sir, effective security relies on evidence-based protocols applied consistently. What our data shows is that scientifically valuable materials receive appropriate handling when carried by some researchers, but face unnecessary scrutiny when carried by others, with the primary variable being the researcher's race. This inconsistency doesn't enhance security. It compromises it by misallocating resources and potentially damaging sensitive scientific materials. The testimony continued for over an hour, with Marcus maintaining his methodical, data-driven approach despite increasingly politicized questioning. As he left the hearing room, he was approached by Thomas Delton, Agent Delton's son, who had been sitting quietly in the back row. Dr. Washington, Thomas said, his voice tense but controlled. I watched your testimony. You never once mentioned my father by name. This investigation isn't about individuals, Marcus replied. It's about patterns and systems. My father was fired last week, Thomas said. 15 years of service ended because of one incident. Marcus met the young man's gaze. I'm sorry for the impact on your family, truly, but the evidence shows this wasn't one incident, it was part of a pattern affecting hundreds of people. Your father had 27 documented cases of similar conduct. Thomas's expression shifted slightly. He always said he was just following training. But after watching you today, I'm beginning to wonder if he was wrong. He hesitated, then added, he kept records of the directives he received from supervisors, email printouts, meeting notes. He was going to use them in his defense, but maybe they should be part of your investigation instead. Marcus recognized the potential significance of this development. If you're willing to share those records, they could help ensure the responsibility falls where it belongs, on the systems that enabled this behavior, not just on individuals. Thomas nodded slowly. I'll consider it. My father might not agree, but I think it's the right thing to do. As Marcus walked away from the Capitol building, his phone rang. It was Director Collins. The White House just issued an executive memorandum directing all federal agencies to review scientific material transport protocols, she said, her voice triumphant. Your testimony made the difference. Marcus felt a complex mix of emotions, satisfaction at the progress, concern for the human costs, and determination to ensure the reforms would be meaningful rather than merely symbolic. This is just the beginning, he replied. Systems don't transform overnight. No, Collins agreed, but they do transform when enough pressure is applied at the right points. You've identified those points precisely. 6 months after the initial incident, Marcus found himself standing in the main concourse of the same airport where it had all begun. A press conference was underway, with representatives from DHS, TSA, NASA, and several scientific organizations gathered to announce the implementation of the new Scientific Materials Transport Protocol, SMTP. DHS Secretary Rivera approached the podium. Today marks an important step in balancing security requirements with scientific advancement. The new SMTP establishes clear, consistent procedures for researchers transporting sensitive materials through security checkpoints nationwide. Marcus observed from the side, preferring to let the officials handle the public announcement. The journey to this point had been methodical and data-driven, precisely what one would expect when a scientist addressed a systemic issue. The key components of the new protocol included: 1. Standardized identification procedures for scientific materials. 2. Uniform training for security personnel at research hubs. 3. Clear escalation pathways when questions arise. 4. Independent oversight through a scientific transport review board. 5. Comprehensive data collection to monitor implementation. What the press release didn't mention was the internal accountability measures that had resulted from the investigation: 3 senior TSA officials reassigned, mandatory bias training implemented nationwide, and a complete restructuring of the checkpoint where Marcus had been detained. As the formal presentation concluded, Director Collins joined Marcus. This wouldn't have happened without your methodical approach. Most complaints end with an apology letter and maybe a suspension. You've changed the entire system. The system needed changing, Marcus replied simply, and it wouldn't have happened without that young woman who recorded the video, Janet's legal expertise, Dr. Chen's data analysis, and countless others who shared their experiences. Speaking of sharing experiences, Collins said, the educational component launches next week. Your interview will be part of the training materials. Marcus nodded. The comprehensive training program would include first-hand accounts from scientists who had faced discrimination, creating empathy alongside clear procedural guidelines. After the press conference, as the crowd dispersed, Marcus noticed Thomas Delton waiting near a coffee shop. He approached the young man. The documents you provided were crucial, Marcus said. They showed this was never about individual agents but about unofficial policies and cultural expectations. Thomas nodded. My father still doesn't agree with what I did, but he's started to understand. The settlement will help him transition to a new career. The class action lawsuit had been resolved with a substantial settlement and, more importantly, binding implementation requirements for the new protocols. How's your research going? Thomas asked, changing the subject. We've identified 3 more exoplanets with atmospheric anomalies consistent with biological processes, Marcus replied. The Geneva presentation opened new collaborative opportunities with European space agencies. So in the end, your scientific work continues despite all this. Not despite it, alongside it, Marcus corrected. The same principles apply to both: observation, analysis, identifying patterns, and implementing solutions. Later that evening, Marcus boarded his flight to return to the research center. As he approached the security checkpoint, he noticed the prominent display explaining the new Scientific Materials Transport Protocol. The TSA agent recognized him immediately. Dr. Washington, she said with professional courtesy. We have a dedicated lane for scientific materials transport now. Your credentials are pre-verified in our system. The process was smooth, efficient, and respectful, exactly as it should have been from the beginning. Once through security, Marcus checked his messages. Among them was an email from a young black physics graduate student. Copy. Dr. Washington, I'm traveling to present my first major research paper next week. Thanks to the protocols you helped establish, I can focus on my science instead of worrying about security challenges. Your dual contribution to astrophysics and scientific accessibility has shown me that we can transform systems without compromising our primary scientific mission. With profound gratitude. Jamal Williams, PhD candidate, quantum physics. Marcus smiled as he boarded the plane. The incident that had begun with discrimination had culminated in systematic change. As an astrophysicist, he had spent his career studying how complex systems evolve. Now he had participated in evolving one right here on Earth. His phone buzzed with a final message from Director Collins. NASA's Diversity in Science initiative launching next quarter. Board unanimously voted you as honorary chair. This is just the beginning. As the plane took off, Marcus gazed out the window at the stars becoming visible in the darkening sky. There were patterns everywhere, in distant atmospheric anomalies, in human behavior, in institutional systems. The scientific method had proven effective for addressing them all. The watershed moment hadn't been the viral video or even the lawsuit. It had been the decision to approach injustice with the same methodical rigor one would apply to any natural phenomenon: observe, analyze, hypothesize, test, and implement. That approach had transformed not just a single encounter but an entire system. And in doing so, it had cleared the path for countless others to advance human knowledge without unnecessary barriers, which had been Marcus's mission all along.